America has always had her heroes, her leaders, her inventors, her generals, and her visionaries. But during the turn of the 19th century, right after the Civil War, the men who stood out and above the rest were the industrial giants and genius inventors.
Good evening, me love. How are you? I was just a-talking to old McDougall outside here, and I cannot help but mention my lovely wife and lad.
You mean your soon-to-be son? He is not born yet, dear. But, darling, can you geese a home? Methinks he's a-comin' now. And so, Andrew Carnegie was born in Dunfermline, Scotland, on November 25th, 1835. His father was a weaver, and his mother a small grocery shop owner and shoe mender. The young Carnegie was expected to follow in the weaving profession of his father. Obviously, he did not. In reality, the industrial boom that would later make Carnegie one of the wealthiest men in the world made his father's weaving skills expendable and taught him a beginning lesson of poverty. As Carnegie later said, "I began to learn what poverty meant. It was burnt into my heart then that my father had to beg for work, and then and there came the resolve that I would cure that when I got to be a man." So what happened then? "Well, dear, I do not ken what we'll do when we reach America. But when we get to Pittsburgh, I suppose the barn'll have to work some."
Aye, indeed. But he's a bright young'un. He'll learn quick and perhaps get some more schooling in too.
And that's what happened. First, Andrew Carnegie went to work as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory for $1.20 wage. He then became a messenger boy in the city's telegraph office and used a library open to working boys to educate himself. While working at the telegraph office, Carnegie met a man by the name of Andrew Scott, a worker at the Pennsylvania Railroad, who hired Carnegie as a personal secretary and telegraph officer for $35 a month. Diligently applying himself to his tasks, Carnegie eventually moved up the executive ladder and became the superintendent of the Pittsburgh division of the Pennsylvania Railroad. During the Civil War, Carnegie actually worked alongside Scott in transporting military equipment for the Union troops. However, while the railroad was the first step in Carnegie's success, he didn't end there. After the Civil War, Carnegie saw potential in the iron industry of America, so he focused his attention on the Keystone Bridge Company, a group working to replace wooden bridges with iron ones. Within 3 years, he was making an annual income of $50,000. But he didn't end there either. Carnegie kept a close eye on the iron industry and came to the conclusion that steel would soon replace iron for the production of heavy goods. In 1870, Carnegie produced his first blast furnace, used to produce primarily iron. But only 4 years later, by 1874, he had already opened his first steel furnace. Carnegie continued expanding and investing, and by 1892 had formed the Carnegie Steel Company, the largest steel company in the world, and valued at $25 million. Andrew Carnegie made Henry Frick the chairman of the company, but that would result in more problems in the future. While Carnegie was over in Scotland visiting his family in 1892, Frick made the decision on his own to lower the wages of his workers. Carnegie had never approved this, and as might have been expected, the members of the Amalgamated Iron and Steel Workers Union called for a strike. Against Carnegie's previous orders, Frick ordered 300 strikebreakers and thugs to intimidate the strikers, resulting in a battle that killed 10 men and wounded 60. Now, Carnegie himself actually advocated workers' unions and believed that workers had a right to protect themselves. And while he was furious with Frick for disobeying orders, in public he never criticized Henry Frick, but instead had to take responsibility for the tragedy. This incident is often known as the Homestead Strike of 1892. It did not severely harm Carnegie's steel empire, though, as in 1900, his company produced more steel and metal than all of Great Britain. To be even more specific, in the 10-year span from 1889 to 1899, the annual production of steel rose from 332,111 to 2,663,412 tons, and profits increased from $2 million to $40 million. The relationship between Carnegie and Frick grew even more tense until Carnegie bought Frick out for $15 million in 1899. Ironically, just 2 years later, Frick joined with J.P. Morgan to challenge Carnegie's empire. Unwilling to fight a potentially 10 to 15-year battle, Carnegie simply wrote his asking price down on a paper and gave it to Morgan, who immediately accepted it and paid Carnegie the $480 million for his steel empire. When combined with his own companies, Morgan's new U.S. Steel Corporation valued at around $1.4 billion. While the richest man in America and in the world, Carnegie also believed in a principle he called the gospel of wealth. This principle held that it was the duty of rich men and women to use their wealth to benefit the welfare of the community. As Carnegie himself wrote, "A man who dies rich dies disgraced." Throughout his lifetime, Carnegie had given away approximately $350 million to charity. Even after his death, $125 million was placed with the Carnegie Corporation to carry on this philanthropy. Now, even though I had said that the money was given to charity, it would be more accurate to say that Carnegie absolutely abhorred charities. So, to be more precise, he gave that money to organizations that helped the needy help themselves. Perhaps that's why he established 2,500 public libraries. He always had a love for learning. A few other facts about Andrew Carnegie that we should probably note. 1. He was the first individual to call for a League of Nations. Think of the United Nations today. 2. He built a Palace of Peace, which later evolved into the World Court. 3. He established the Carnegie Institute of Pittsburgh, the Carnegie Institute of Technology, and the Carnegie Institute of Washington for research into the natural and physical sciences. 4. Furthermore, Carnegie established the Endowment for International Peace. Andrew Carnegie did live to see the beginning of World War I in 1914, but such violence and the outbreak of war instead of peace broke his heart. This great man, an industrial giant, and a genius of his time, died on August 11, 1919, and was survived by his wife Louise and his daughter Margaret. His wealth at the time of his death was $475 million, and it accounted for 1 out of 166 of the entire GDP, gross domestic product, of America. An industrialist, millionaire, and philanthropist, Carnegie was indeed a man to be remembered.